In this lesson, we'll learn about subdividing our geometry so that we can begin sculpting high-resolution detail. So the key with ZBrush and 3D models is the fact that we can subdivide our models into millions and millions of polygons so that we can use more traditional type methods to sculpt very high-resolution detail and not have to worry about a lot of the technical aspects. We can just concentrate on the artistic kind of aspects of the model that we're creating. So here we have a simple box that we can use as an example, and this just has 6 faces, 6 polygons here. So there's not really a whole lot we can do to change the shape of this box. I mean, we need resolution to be able to change the shape, and there really isn't any. So what we want to do is subdivide the model. So subdividing is going to happen in the geometry subpalette of the tool palette. So we'll open up that geometry subpalette. All this top section is grayed out because we don't have any subdivision levels on this yet. So right now this is the base level, or the base geometry, what you here refer to as the base, or level 0. So if we go ahead and divide, and you can see the hotkey for that is Control-D, that will actually do a few things. So you'll see a couple things happen here. First of all, we've got a new subdivision level here. So we're now at level 2, and our initial cube is now the level 1. So we can take this slider and move up and down the different levels. Okay. We can also do this by hitting D on our keyboard to move up a level, or Shift D to move down a level. So the idea is that we can modify this model at any particular level and it'll affect all the other levels. So we get to a higher level, we can do higher resolution detail. If we need to make larger overall changes, we can do that at lower levels. You can see that not only has it added more polygons, so if I come in here, let me turn off polyframe. Not only has it added more polygons, so for each face it's now turned that into 4 faces. So if you consider this a face of the cube, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4. But it's also smoothed out the shape. So it's added resolution and it's smoothed the shape. Okay? So each one of these faces is 4 and the shape has been smoothed. Now if at any time you want to get rid of a subdivision level, for instance, if I'm at the top level, I can delete a lower level. If I'm at a lower level, I can delete an upper level. So if I want to, I can just delete higher, and now I'm left with that base once again. Now one thing to be aware of is this SMT button, this Subdivide Smooth Modifier. If this is turned off, then resolution will still be added, but the shape will not be smooth. So if I now subdivide it, you can see that I've actually divided each face into 4 polygons. So each time you subdivide, you're multiplying by 4, but the shape hasn't changed at all. And so I can add a level without that on, maybe even add 2 levels without that on. I can go back in and let me divide that again. Let me turn that off. Divide again. So let me turn off polyframe here. There we go. So now each one of those faces has been divided into 4 different faces. Okay. We can check and see what the resolution is of our mesh. You can see we're up to 96 polygons here if we just hover over this. And now at this point I can turn this back on and divide again, and now it's taking that previous level and smoothing it from there. So we're not getting that sphere shape. We're getting something now that's calculated from that previous level. Okay. Now you'll notice that because I now smoothed it at this level 4, those lower levels have been affected a little bit. So you can see that everything's not completely straight now as it was before. Okay. Now all the way down at the bottom, there's really no way that you can manipulate that. But once you get up to higher levels, you can see that it's starting to show the results of what we're doing up here at the higher levels. So the idea is you can start to subdivide this until it gets very smooth, and then you can start to add very high resolution detail to it. We can add all of that sculpted detail that we want to add. And then at any time we can go ahead, take that down to lower levels. You can see that detail disappearing because at this level we don't have the polygons to support that. And then moving back up, and you can see all that detail still there. So when you're working with your meshes here in ZBrush, typically you're going to bring in a base mesh, and then you're going to start subdividing it. And most of the time you'll subdivide it with this button on so that you can get that smoothing along with it. and then you'll subdivide to a certain level, you'll do some sculpting, you'll get to a point where you can't create any more detail because it's so low res. You'll subdivide again, add a little bit more detail, and eventually get to a point where you're able to retain the detail that you want to create at whatever level you have. But once you save your Z tool, you're still going to retain all of those subdivision levels so that you can go up and down and modify any of those levels, and you have all that data available to you. This is really useful for not only just working kind of efficiently going up and down the subdivision levels, but you can also, if you're working with a low-res piece of geometry, you want to calculate normal maps, you're going to need to have low-res or lower levels of that. So you could create a map that says, okay, I want to make this cube. When I apply this map, I want it to displace to make it look like this. So those maps are calculated based on the low and high resolution levels. Okay, so just remember Control D to divide and D to go up your subdivision levels, Shift D to go down your subdivision levels. You can delete levels that you're not on, so I can delete higher levels. If I only want to delete the highest level, I'll go to the one right below that and delete higher. Okay, if I only want to delete the lowest level, I'll go down to the one right above it and delete lower. Okay, this freeze subdivision levels comes in handy when we're doing different actions in ZBrush, which may come later. It enables us to freeze the subdivision levels, do some things that we would normally not be able to do with a mesh that has levels on it, and then turn that off and it'll reproject all that detail. So the short story is that there are a lot of tools in ZBrush that require you to have a mesh that doesn't have any subdivision levels, and so if you want to retain those levels, you can use that. Okay, and we also have buttons for smoothing the UVs and recalculating UVs, but really want you to concentrate on this smooth button here. Experiment with that a little bit. If you just want to add detail but you don't want to change the shape, you can turn that off. If you do want to smooth it, you can turn that back on when you subdivide your mesh. Okay, so that's a look at using subdivision in ZBrush, and we'll be using that a lot, and you'll be using it on most of your projects in ZBrush when you're subdividing and doing some high resolution sculpting. So now that we've talked about subdividing, let's go ahead and actually talk about some sculpting. So get into some doing some more interesting work here and start doing some sculpting on some models. So we'll go ahead and talk about that in the next lesson.